The Philippines government debt has consistently been a figurative issue that has been conversed throughout recent years. This is likely being driven by two factors, the first of which is due to the government overspending either through its annual budget or because of its infrastructure-driven administration, which promised a $180 billion development plan across the archipelago nation of the Philippines. The second of which is because of the recent COVID-19 economic crisis, which was likely a black swan event and has affected the entire world's economy. But the government's Build plan, which was introduced way back in 2016, was a mega initiative, and it might not even sound quite a lot compared to other nations, but when we compare it to the Philippines' nominal gross domestic product of that year, we can see that the nation had only a nominal gross domestic product of around $318 billion, estimated by the World Bank. Hence, we have seen the potential disastrous debt burden that the nation of the Philippines would undertake had it fully encompassed this well-known Build initiative. Well, it did, and so we have seen the population of the nation drive into fear. Further, the nation of the Philippines' total debt, as measured by the last available data as of the time of the video's writing in March 2022, saw that the Philippines' debt has ballooned to a record high of around $229 billion, presumably pushed by government spending as it battles out economic worries and also the nation's continued drive for infrastructures. Yes, despite all of the fear across the world that even some nations had gone to default because of their debt, the Philippines continues to borrow money to fuel its ambitions. One significant loan as of this video's writing was when the Philippines government and the Regional Development Bank, also known as the Asian Development Bank, had signed the first tranche of the whopping $4.3 billion loan to fund one of its biggest initiatives known as the South Commuter Railway Project. With such issues, we are likely to see the nation of the Philippines' debt rise. But here's why we think the Philippines continues to push for such an initiative regardless of debt issues. We can measure it using the Debt-To-GDP Ratio, which is a measure of how much debt the nation has in contrast to its gross domestic product. This is stated by some economists to be one of the best, if not already the best way to measure a nation's debt burden. The debt burden is not really estimated by how much the government has incurred so far, such as its $229 billion record high, as this can be easily paid down as long as the government sees its GDP growth, along with other measures such as tax revenues and so on. So getting back, we have gathered data from the Bureau of the Treasury of the Philippines, which shows that the Philippines, despite everything that has happened thus far, has a debt-to-GDP ratio of 63.5% as of the first quarter of 2022, which was a ratio last seen since 2005. This is likely an awful moment in the nation's history, but not really the worst moment in history. You see, the debt-to-GDP ratio of the Philippines was actually far higher throughout the last decades. From 1990 to 2000, the Philippines had a minimum debt-to-GDP of around 51.7 and even as high as 74.9. This would imply that across the three-decade history from back then and today, the Philippines has managed to strive against its debt problems and build its economy stronger. Furthermore, in addressing the issues of how the Philippines' debt ballooned in recent years, data from the time this Build was introduced in 2016, the Philippines had actually a debt to GDP of around 42.1%. And by the time it had gone to 2019, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippines' debt to GDP has actually shrunken to just 39.6%. But as soon as the economic crisis hit, things became far different. So was it because of COVID-19, or was it because of the overspending of the government on its infrastructures? Well, it can be both. After all, it still continued to spend on its ambitions while the crisis was happening. But was it the right choice to do? Well, that would only be truly answered after the Philippines has fully been successful in its mega initiatives and can overcome its debt burdens. This is why it can lead us to the government's stance on its infrastructure drive. Why did the government not stop, or even slow down its spending as debt did balloon? Before we answer that, we must first note that the Philippines' debt-to-GDP ratio had decreased from 2016, the year which it introduced the massive initiative, to 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic. It has a 3-year time frame that saw big names be signed into law and some billion-dollar loans had been taken out. Yet the ratio had dropped from 42.1% to 2016. Well, simple. The GDP had grown far faster than which the government could borrow. This is why we think the government's top leaders and finance ministries have from time and time again noted that they can do what they have done in the past: outgrow its debt and have enough money to pay down incoming repayments. This was from the incoming Finance Secretary Benjamin Diokno, who had expressed his confidence in the nation to be able to easily outgrow its debt, as long as, noted, the nation grows at least 6 to 7%, which it had done continuously in the past, with the first quarter of 2022 seeing an 8.3% growth so far. A separate expert on this topic, the current sitting Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez, has also told the new government administration to rather place an emphasis on tax initiatives, such as raising tax rates. But this was repelled by Diokno, who was again confident in growing the economy rather than focusing on tax rate hikes. Furthermore, a topic that has also not been presumably properly adjusted to the public's view is separate confidence matters. This means we may not even just rely on the government's trust on driving economic growth. But just like Japan, which has an enormous debt-to-GDP ratio, it can confidently outweigh its debt because of its enormously large inventory of foreign reserves. The Philippines, which is in the same position, has as of April of 2022 around $106 billion of these foreign reserves. Furthermore, the Philippines' total debt is majority owned nationally and a lack of foreign debt. Of the total debt stock, only 30% was sourced from foreign entities, with 70% being loaned by the very people of the nation. And does that matter? Yes, according to some economists and experts. As Paul Krugman, an economist from the United States, once said about the US's gigantic debt, we owe it to ourselves. It is just an idea that as individuals, the loans the government has is just from its people, and the nation's own citizens would be less likely to treat it as a financial asset. But as we are not economists, it is more difficult to talk about how this entirety of internal and external debt can play out for the Philippines, and could only rely on the words of actual experts. So, knowing all these so far, is the Philippines' debt an issue? Or can we easily outgrow it and pay down the repayments needed in the coming years or decades? Or if we can actually grow our economy, will we see the Philippines' tax be increased within the coming years? This is in fact already big, considering that the nation has one of the highest across the entire Asian continent, with its individual taxable income being as high as 35% and corporations around 30%. Well, we really have to rely on the government's role in ensuring that the nation does indeed outgrow its debt and has enough money to pay down incoming interest repayments. Further, we also think that the new government should be cautious, especially the fact that the US is on the verge of a recession, as it is always known that whenever the Western giant does indeed see negative GDP growth, it affects the entire world. With the Philippines a nation that relies on the US heavily, this may indeed be a hurdle to overcome. Moreover, we are also seeing inflation rising in the local communities and oil prices being a huge burden to the Philippines. And there are obviously a lot more problems down the line, but the government may not be able to go with its original plan of growing the economy. Then we may expect a further tax reform, which will likely be raised. But where do you think the Philippines economy is headed? And do you think the government can fully maximize its own plan to battle out incoming debt worries? Let us know down below.